introduction. Right, so welcome everybody to this Development Studies Association conference session about greening the economic and social recovery from COVID-19. So thank you all for coming. The three of us have put this session together, and the reason we're talking on this theme is that we're all part of a project which is just finishing, funded by the UK Research Councils. Which was funded as part of a call for research focusing on international development and the recovery from COVID-19. So that's the reason we're here. So we have three speakers, two of which are my co-conveners. So Simon Barra-Kielnov, I can never pronounce your name correctly, Simon, so I need a lesson after all this time. And then Maliva Mubanga from the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research. Simon is from the University of Ghana. And then we've been joined, which is really, really nice, by Asana, and I'm going to ask for advice on your name. Oyampera is something like that, from the University of Oxford. So maybe you can correct me later when you introduce yourself. Who's our third author on the panel. So all three have uploaded either a PDF presentation or a video or both onto the conference platform. And we're joined by a few others in the virtual room as well, so who can introduce themselves as they speak, I think, rather than going around the screen and taking up lots of time. And I'm joined, you can see a sort of blurred shape next to me, by one of my colleagues at University College London as well. So my name's Jim Watson, I should have said that earlier on. So just to talk you through the rough agenda for the session, we will first, I've done the introduction. We're going to ask the three speakers who I've just introduced very briefly, just to literally spend 2 minutes, maybe I can stretch to 3, just introducing what their work is about. But I think the main thing, and that's been true for most of the Development Studies Association conference, is to focus on discussion. So if all three of you could, briefly introduce your work, but I think the real emphasis of your 2 or 3 minutes is on what are the questions you'd like to discuss, you know, and hopefully people will have at least got some idea of what you've done. Some will have hopefully have read your presentations and looked at your videos. So that's the next thing we will do. Then we have some comments from a couple, I hope, of invited stakeholders. I know 1 or 2 are already on the call, and we may have 1 or 2 already to join us later. And then we'll open it up to a general discussion. And we're going to go through to 12:30 UK time. So that's another 35 minutes from now. So I hope that sounds okay. So without further ado, Simon, I'm going to start with you, and I hope your connection is good enough. I think those of us with cameras on, as suggested, we'll turn them off just to see if it makes it a bit better. So Simon, over to you for your 2 or 3 minutes of introduction and key questions. Thanks, Simon.
Okay, Jim, I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, for the time being we can. Thank you.
Simon, I think you muted yourself by accident. Oh no, did he disappear?
No.
Oh, no, he's there. Okay, good.
Simon, do you want to have another go? Because you've gone quiet. Or we could go to another speaker while you sort out, you know, try and get to a better connection.
Yes. So apologies for this. I think we have a major internet challenge at the university campus at the moment. So I'm using a makeshift connection, which is not that good. Okay. So, but let me just say a few words and then and hope that it will stay on, then probably can pass it on to my other colleagues. So thank you for the introduction. And yes, this paper that I'm actually presenting on behalf of my colleagues actually stem out of the work that Jim has just talked about. And in a way, the backdrop is, if we look at the long-standing existential threat in terms of climate change on the basis of anthropogenic factors, and not in the not too, distant past 3 years back now, our confrontation with the global pandemic, which is the COVID-19. These two sort of global challenges have given us the opportunity to rethink about, how we proceed with our development trajectories in terms of either moving away from the business as usual approaches as a way of helping us to scale the future. And if we are to do that, what will be, the way to go? So in a more compelling way, it's important we look at greener approaches. So Ghana as a country, having signed up to the Paris Agreement, part of the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, the Africa Agenda, 2057, and all the other global sort of conventions. The key, the need for Ghana to now begin to look at what to do is very compelling as to how to achieve these. And so as a team, our quest was to understand what the situation is at the moment. And in going through our work packages, we've actually looked at what the landscape in terms of the policy situation is in fostering green development. And moving on, we needed to look at what will be the opportunities. How should Ghana actually tackle its a future development agenda along the green line in the midst of all the challenges. And I'm sure most of you now actually have heard that Ghana, we have no option but to go to the IMF. And so that also becomes another global, a country sort of situation. But as part of this work, what came out clearly was that we have two options. Either we look at ways of embracing our forward march in a very robust way, which we call the leapfrog. In leapfrogging, it means that we need to actually adopt very ambitious green strategies. But we also have, the blended approach, which sort of looked at not being too ambitious, but of course ensuring able to still meet our green initiative target the longer term, which will mean over time, we need to be doing things incrementally on the green front. These two scenarios sort of present the opportunity for government to begin to actually rethink in terms of its initiatives. But the questions that are compelling now include how should government do that, especially on the finance, the financial sort of angle. Is Ghana prepared to, adopt the robust approach of, going forward, or it may actually adopt the opportunities embedded in the, blended sort of pathway. And so this work has really unpacked quite a lot of opportunities that need to really be tapped into. In the sense that we have opportunities that can sort of support both scenarios. But it's a question of will policymakers actually embrace such opportunities without hesitation? Where will they actually find the resources, or how should funding of such opportunities take shape? So these are two fundamental questions that we have asked, and I wish we were to have some policymakers from the Ghana side being part of this. I haven't seen anyone yet. Nonetheless, I believe that once we continue the discussion, some of them may join. So if you have heard me up till now, then I think the joy is all mine because of the internet situation.
Thank you, Simon. No, that came out very clearly, actually. So your backup plan is working on the internet, and I think that question that you asked is really, really important one, which I hope we'll get some views on later. Which is how, really how government should realise these scenarios. We academics like us can develop scenarios like the ones you described in conjunction with stakeholders, but then what do governments do, and the finance challenge as well. So thank you, Simon, very much. Next, I'm going to turn to you, Malima, to do similarly. So again, a very brief summary and maybe a question at the end. So over to you, Malima.
Thank you, Jim, and it's a pleasure to be on this platform. So just to quickly get into what the scope of focus is for us, we are looking at what it means when we talk about greening the social and economic recovery in light of the COVID pandemic. So our perspective is Zambia's green recovery and development for all, more so that as a country, we are Zambia is transitioning into a green economy. So I'll start with the question before I get into the issue. So probably we don't know what that means. We need to put it into context. And it's also just gratifying to note that we are developing a green growth strategy as a country. The invited guests will speak more to that. But in the context of the recommendations that we brought out, we are seeking to investigate options for a clean, resilient recovery through a balanced socioeconomic recovery. So what does it mean? And part of the conversation that is gaining traction in the country is largely in two sectors. That's the agriculture and the energy sector. And more so because for the energy sector, we have low electrification rates. And then there's a high level of dependency on hydro power generation, which constitutes about 80%. So that's worrisome, more so that we have been we've been adversely impacted by the climate change. We're in a region which is drought prone, and there are projections that it's going to intensify. And then let me quickly move to the agriculture sector. So the agriculture sector, there's high dependency on livelihoods and wealth creation in that sector. And this also trickles down to the smallholder farmers. And most of their agriculture is rain-fed. So the question we need to ask is, as we are greening the social and economic recovery, do we know what it means in those two sectors, which are critical to the economy, but more so probably take a multi-sector approach. In the case of Zambia, we're developing a green growth strategy. So what does that mean? So these are just some of the things that we hope to discuss and also just get some views. And I'm glad that the invited guests from Zambia are here. They'll speak more to some of these aspects because they actually have an idea of what's obtaining on the ground. And we hope that the other countries and other regions will also get to learn from us and we also learn from them. So Jim, I hope I'm within the 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I think I'm done.
Yeah, great. That's not bad, Malima. Thank you. Again, a nice summary, and again, some a good question. What does this recovery look like, but particularly in the context of these specific sectors you talked about, and the impact on climate change on those sectors. Taking that into account. So yeah, I look forward to hearing from the Zambian stakeholders in a moment. But before we do that, I'm going to go to our third speaker, which is Sana. So Sana, please again summarize the work you've done. I know it's slightly different, but it's related enough, I think, that it adds something quite interesting to our conversation. And again, end with a question you'd like to discuss. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, Jim, and thanks so much for the previous speakers for sharing your thoughts on top of sharing already the presentations and the videos as well, which was really helpful. So indeed, my work is quite different. It's carried out with two co-authors who work a lot in the area of energy policy. And we are looking at sustainable development goals as a sort of framework that applies in many cases and has a lot of policy action around it as well. So I'm very, very keen to kind of hear your thoughts on that. The idea with the SDGs, right, is that they are meant to be sort of integrated and indivisible, but really countries do very likely need to prioritize between investment into one SDG that perhaps very well aligns with their development needs and capacities, and maybe not focus so much on the other ones in terms of investment. Now, having that idea of prioritization, there's a little bit of a body of research that emerges looking at how these strategies to achieve one specific SDG through investment or any kind of action might actually also impact multiple dimensions of human development. So then kind of establishing linkages between other SDGs at the same time. These could be negative or could be positive, so synergies or trade-offs. What we are doing in our study is to go beyond what the existing studies have done, where they tend to use sort of common knowledge to investigate these linkages. And we are looking a little bit deeper into SDG 7, which is the energy SDG. And we're looking at 4 particular example energy technologies in clean energy: photovoltaic systems, wind turbines, nuclear power plants, and clean cook stoves. And we're presenting this sort of blueprint analysis of looking into these 4 technologies and looking into their components, essentially, that each technology requires for the establishment and deployment of it. How are the components and the industries that they in turn come from? How are they related to the other SDGs within this framework? And we're looking at this at the level of indicators, so the kind of closest operationalized value to something kind of very actionable being taken and measurable being looked at in the SDGs. The paper is kind of long. There's many sections within it that are quite sort of methodologically heavy. So I try to present sort of the key findings here. I would be very happy to share the draft once we are a little bit further along with the publication process. But essentially, some of the key findings that we derive is that many of the SDGs together with SDG 7 do result in co-benefit densities and trade-off densities, which is the kind of measure we develop here in the paper. The photovoltaic system has the highest co-benefits, and clean cook stoves have the lowest co-benefit densities. And on the other hand, the cook stoves and nuclear fission have the highest trade-off densities, so sort of negatively impact the achievement of another SDG in the framework. And we find this to be quite well linked to the sort of proportion of service industries as opposed to manufacturing industries in this technology network that underlines each of these 4 technologies, with the idea that services tend to lead a little bit more to co-benefits, and where the technology uses a lot of manufacturing industries to having both co-benefits and trade-offs. I wanted to kind of link in the discussion a bit more into what both of you were talking about in Ghana and Zambia about the areas of climate action, and especially about agriculture and how those are reflected in the SDG network. But I'll leave them to the discussion, and I'll just leave you with some of the questions that I was hoping to also get to discuss. So it was really great to hear more, first of all, about the policy side from both the context of Ghana and Zambia. And what I was hoping to hear from you is that, in your opinion, as you were looking at these areas related to climate and green recovery in particular, do SDGs really matter? Like, are they helpful in any sort of practical sense? And especially the targets that SDG goals break into, and then the indicators that each of those targets break into. Like, are these sort of part of your discussions? Are they a helpful tool? How do you sort of interact with those? Over the past couple of years that my co-authors and I have been working on this paper, I've noted with kind of great curiosity that DSA actually hasn't really had any panels on SDGs per se as like a framework and reflecting perhaps this body of research that is emerging around it. So that was, I think, kind of curious, and I'm glad to have been placed in this panel where I think we can hopefully make some linkages between these 2 areas of research. And then secondly, beyond SDGs, whether they help or are are used in the kind of discussions that you take part in, but also were you familiar with any of this literature that I have been citing in the slides about looking at synergies, looking at trade-offs between SDGs? Have those been at all considered in policymaking and sort of prioritizing maybe goals and investments? Could this be something helpful? Our paper is sort of a general view looking at evidence in the academic literature. So sort of a global view of whether these synergies or trade-offs take place, but we do qualify our findings with the idea that it could be also specified to a country because scenarios might be quite different based on how the industrial mix and especially the kind of whether things can be made locally or whether there is a lot of imports involved come into play in those productive activities. So yeah, would be very happy to hear from you and I look forward to an interesting discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sana. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think you've drawn out some of the links already with the other two speakers. And, you know, I was just listening, while listening to Malima, you know, one of the big issues in electricity there is hydro, and there's a clear set of SDG trade-offs inherent in that as well as in the land use case. So, yeah, I think there's some clear links. But a great question as well, you know, do the SDGs really matter in a practical sense in discussions in the countries we're either living in or working in, is a good question. So we're, you know, I knew this would happen. Time is short for these sessions. They don't give us very long. So first I'm going to prioritize the two guest speakers, sort of commentators that have joined us from Zambia. And then I'm going to open it up to any other speakers who wish to comment on any of these questions. And we'll see how we go. All I would ask to everybody is if you could make your comments relatively brief, just so that other people can have time to speak. So first up, I'm going to go to, sorry, I'm just checking my notes. So Chitembo Chunga, so do you want to go first, Chitembo? I know we said hello earlier, and just give a couple of minutes of thoughts on what you've heard.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to the speakers that have already spoken. I know we're really tight with time, so I'll quickly I'll start with what Malima first mentioned about Zambia developing a green growth strategy. As you all know, the COVID really hit us bad because it really came to shake. It was a huge turbulence. Every effort that Zambia has been making towards promoting mitigation, resilience building, and adaptation to climate change were shaken up. More so because our reliance is on agriculture and still rain-fed agriculture to the majority of our people. So the economic livelihoods were affected, and then that brought a huge risk. First, it was survival. So now, having realized that and having worked on ensuring that whatever gains we made in fight against climate change shouldn't be drawn backwards just because of the COVID, the government is developing a green growth strategy, which is ensuring that beyond what we've been doing in the past of integrating climate change issues in national development plans, in policies, in strategies, how do we have this blueprint that is going to guide the key sectors that are affected by climate change to move towards a green economy? So we are transforming our economy from what it has normally been to whatever investments that we're going to make from then onwards, once it's adopted, to become green. So the major issues that the green growth strategy is going to focus on is sustainability, transformation of our economy from what the conventional system that we've known, if we're going to make any investments in whatever field, but especially in the key areas of land use, energy, agriculture, forestry management, how do we ensure that the investments are not going to take us backwards? And secondly, as we're doing these investments, the COVID has taught us that we need to review our practices in infrastructure, in health provision, in transportation, even in agriculture itself, the markets, access to markets, the supply chains. So integrating all those aspects in there has become very paramount as we develop the green growth strategy, which is going to help us shift our economy, even the structure of our economy, and move forward. just to share a little bit more on how the recovery has been in Zambia amidst the COVID. One of the greatest things, as I mentioned, is we realize that we don't want to lose the gains. So there's a big political will to that. And that has made us have even now a standalone ministry which looks at green economy and the environment, but they work closely with the Ministry of Finance and National Planning, which is very critical because of the critical role that the Treasury works in resource mobilization to ensure that whatever resources we're mobilizing should finance green investments. So the collaboration is big, the stakeholder management is huge and it's very critical, but also the very fact that we have this political will, it's helping us move the agenda of recovery from the COVID, promoting it to be not regressive on the gains that we made in the fight against climate change. And the coordination aspect is now more coordinated at a central place under the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. However, the implementation is decentralized. It is decentralized in the sense that we understand that the sectors, the key sectors that are affected by climate change and that also had an impact on the productivity, especially in the agriculture sector and the energy sector, they will do their own implementation, but we needed an entry point where everything converges, where discussions for policy change, for resource mobilization, for stakeholder engagements, and then that everybody all the key stakeholders, be it private sector, be it the financial system, they need to converge and have a common goal so that the recovery is well coordinated and well implemented and targets are set and agreed upon. I would want to also mention on the need of how Zambia has ensured that even at the local level of what we call a ward, they're integrating the green recovery aspects into their ward level integrated development plans. And they're very integrated and they draw from the National Development Plan. And earlier on, one of the speakers was mentioning of how relevant are the SDGs in whatever we're doing. They're extremely relevant because whatever development activities we're doing now, or which Zambia is making headways upon, it has to conform to what we've signed up at the SDGs. It has to conform to what we've signed up in the NDCs, which go to the NFCCC or the Paris Agreement that we signed up. So it's really a huge issue of how do we make that trade-off and all the analysis that goes on. And that's why we appreciate the study that was done by Mlima and team, which is helping make the decisions that these are really relevant decisions and we need to make those trade-offs. I would end there for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chitembo. That's really helpful, and especially for answering some of the questions directly. And yeah, I guess the point you made, which is about coordination across government departments, which is a challenge in just about every country I've ever encountered. It's interesting to hear how that's been tackled. Well, forgive me, I didn't say where you were from. Do you want to just say briefly your affiliation? So you're within the Zambian government, aren't you?
Yes, I'm within the Zambian government. I'm heading one of the climate change programs in the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Apologies for not asking you or introducing you. So I'm going to move on now to Musadabwe Chulu. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. But again, do you want to introduce yourself very briefly, where you're from, but also give a couple of minutes of comments?
Thank you, Jim. You did a very good job pronouncing my name.
That's really.
Yeah. As Jim has said, I'm Musadabwe Chulu. I'm from Zambia. I'm sort of an expert in the agriculture sector in the country, so to say. And most of my comments will ride on what Chitembo has already said. I think she's covered a lot of the issues, but I'll try to zero in on the agriculture sector. One of the things is that the Zambian agriculture sector supports the livelihoods of so many Zambians, over 50% of the Zambian population. And with the coming in of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw an impact on both agricultural production as well as the marketing value chains. Now, if we place Mulima's research in the context of the Zambian agriculture, you realize that it is very important for the agriculture sector to be able to withstand the shocks that have arisen from COVID. But apart from that, one of the perpetual problems that we face is climate change. And the agriculture sector is known to be one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions through expansion of agricultural land and livestock emissions. So now trying to marry these two challenges to the agriculture sector and how we recover from them as a country is quite important. And the framing of the research gives us an opportunity to explore ways in which we can recover from the pandemic. And some of the suggestions that have been brought on board, for instance, are increasing irrigated agriculture to mitigate the fight against climate change. And it also builds in some resilience into the agricultural households. But at the same time, by having irrigated agriculture, it means we sort of increase their growing periods or the variety of crops that can grow, increase their income, and also in a way mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 on their households. However, with irrigated agriculture comes in the challenge of energy. As Mulimad earlier highlighted, that most of our electricity in Zambia is produced from hydroelectricity, hydro-based power. And with climate change, that affects the availability of water for power generation, but also it affects the availability of water for irrigation. So how do we balance the need to mitigate climate change using irrigation and the need to generate energy? These are some of the interesting aspects that have been explored and how best we can work around them. But we have noticed that some farmers have actually moved way ahead of us. We've noticed a lot of farmers who are in commercial production moving away from the traditional crops into high value tree crops. Now, what this does is that it serves two purposes. First of all, by increasing the area under tree crops, we are sort of increasing our carbon sink, but at the same time, maintaining the incomes of these farmers. And ultimately, in the long run, we expect as the hectareage under these tree crops increases, we expect a reduction in the impacts of climate change on the overall agricultural sector and energy production. Basically, that is to place into context where we are in terms of agriculture. But in terms of policy, one thing I can say is that there's been a lot of political will. There's a lot of political will for the country to move towards creation of a green economy. And most of the issues Chitembo has highlighted with regard to coordination and implementation of the green growth strategy in Zambia. I think that is a start for all of us in energy, agriculture, and even health or other sectors in Zambia to move in and bridge the gap between our various sectors and how we mitigate the impacts of climate change. I think I'll end here for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Dabwe. Thank you. That was great, and you really illustrate some of those trade-offs. But that interesting example about the shifts in, farmers' behaviour being well ahead of the policymakers is quite fascinating as well. So thank you. So we're right up against our time. We have 2 or 3 minutes left, but I just wanted to invite anybody who hasn't spoken, whether they wanted to comment on anything you've heard. You can use the raise hand, which I think is under reactions at the bottom of your screen, or simply jump in. And I hope not too many people jump in all at once. So does anybody else want to either make a comment or ask a question? And if there's others who haven't spoken, don't want to, that's fine. I will perhaps go back to our 3 speakers and just see if any of you want to comment on some of the reflections that you've heard just now. Anyone? Okay, so I I'm tempted to go back to this question about the usefulness of the Sustainable Development Goals, because in a way that's framed the work we've done in Ghana and Zambia, and obviously it's the heart of what Simon's been doing. We've heard a couple of comments, at least from Chip Tembo, that they are quite useful as a way of framing policy. In the absence of your policymakers, Simon, is there any comment you can make about Ghana, briefly in the minute or so we've got left, just to say, how important are the SDGs in the Ghanaian policymaking environment? That's if you can hear me. I wonder if your connection is doing okay.
Hello, Jim. I've been dropping and coming on. Can you rephrase? Otherwise, I'll draw in Abba or need to come in. Yeah,
that may be better.
Rephrase your question.
I mean, literally, you have a minute left, but the main question was, how important are the SDGs in the Ghana policy discussions you've been involved in over the last year or two?
Still struggling to get you.
Okay.
Abba or
Abba,
can
do you want to offer a comment
please?
briefly, because Simon's having trouble with his connection? So Abba's a colleague of Simon's. Go ahead.
So I'll come in. I would say in Ghana, the SDGs cut across everything that we do now, because even our president, Nana Akufo-Addo, is one of the convener of one of the high level committees. So it is, and we also have a baseline data. I think we just launched our second baseline data, just trying to see across our developmental goals where we lie within the SDG. So going forward, every policy in Ghana has an SDG goal linked to it. So it is something that cuts across every policy in Ghana. We want to see it across education, energy, health. You have to link your goals to the SDG. So I will say it is very important in Ghana.
Thank you, Abba, for stepping in. Yes, so Anna's just asked a question in the chat, and absolutely. I mean, I've made a note to myself that we ought to follow up with you afterwards and see, what synergies there are, and just make more contact. And that's one benefit of a session like this. So we can certainly be in touch to follow up. Somebody from the team will be. And clearly, we'd like to follow how your analysis comes out as it develops. But thanks, Abba, for stepping in there. As I said, we're about out of time. The clock outside my window has struck. We have a church next door, so it always tells me exactly what time it is, at least in the UK. So it was brief, as I expected, but I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the three speakers, especially for preparing the materials and also summarising so succinctly what you've been doing, and actually really sticking to the brief and asking a question. Thanks to our particular guests, Chichembo and Musa Dabwe, for your really thoughtful comments. I think that was very helpful for our project and hopefully for Sana too. And I think I will close it there. And of course, thanks to the DSA team, particularly Jan, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, for the technical support. But I'll draw it to a close there. And the recording, I think, will be available afterwards. And
Yes.
Please do follow up with each other after the session.
All right. I shall close the session then for everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.